Safeguarding Africa.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mandisa Mthembu, and this is the Safeguarding Africa podcast. And on today's episode, we have Miss Stacy Lee, who is an educational psychologist, and we are going to be talking about suicide prevention in young people. Now, Stacy will introduce herself a little bit in a few seconds, but I wanted to just share a little bit about why we have her as a guest on the podcast. And mainly it's because after having had the opportunity and privilege to work with her in the past, she she was by a few people called the teenage whisperer, just because of how skilled and how compassionate and how amazing she was working with young people who had some of the most challenging circumstances, including um, suicide, depression, anxiety. And she really just had a skillful way of supporting them and meeting them where they were and really getting them away from high risk to manageable so that they can face the world and be able to live successful lives. And because September is World Suicide Prevention Month, we wanted to just have somebody who can help us think about firstly what is suicide, what does it mean, how does it present, and but also then help us practically, right, as parents, as teachers, as adults who work and live and are responsible for young people, give us advice and practical steps on how to support young people who are struggling in that way, how to spot it, and really just how to prevent suicide, right, how to be who we needed when we were young, when we were struggling with difficult feelings and emotions. Anyway, Stacy, well, thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thanks for inviting me and having me. Yeah, so just a little bit. Obviously, Mandisa and I worked together at an academy a few years ago, and I think we had probably the most challenging 3 years because it was like COVID, and then there was a lot of kids couldn't leave, like just the whole thing, and I think that contributed to a lot of the anxieties that the kids were feeling. So, yeah, so I'm an educational psychologist, but I did start off as a high school English teacher. But I've always been interested in just the development of children, school going age, children to adolescence. And I think I easily built relationships specifically with kids in need. They were very drawn to me. So there was a lot of after school sessions, well, not formal sessions with students, just trying to help them get through things. And I think the thing with teaching is that it's very limiting. And I think going into something like psychology, it expanded my skill set and it expanded, how much of an influence I can have, over a child's life. So I think that I've worked with a lot of kids who have suicide attempts, families who have actually family members who have committed suicide, because of rape, abuse. There's just like a whole long list of things that these kids are going through that we don't actually understand very much. And I think a lot of parents don't understand. And I think a lot of teachers also don't understand because everything is pretty new. And I think through COVID, there's been, if you look at the research, like suicidal behavior, suicide attempts, just anything along the lines of suicide has increased tremendously. And I think it's more important now for us to emphasize how to support those that are going through it or have friends or family that are going through it. So I think the demand for psychology right now is insane. I mean, I see kids under the age of 10 who are on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication, and I think it's just it's a difficult topic, but there's a lot of support that we have to keep developing, like programs that schools have to continuously be developing because, I mean, things change so quickly. So yeah, so I think that's what my keen interest has been, is just supporting kids, in need. So yeah, that's just a little bit about my background with the topic and career wise.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I also just like that you've just gone straight into it in your description. So, can you tell us a little bit about what are the mental health issues that can create suicidal thoughts and behaviors in children, in young.
So I think the most common is obviously depression and anxiety, but I think the reasons for depression and anxiety has changed over the years. So now we
Mm,
look at things such as, trauma and PTSD. And I mean, PTSD and trauma has changed now because obviously if you think about trauma or PTSD, people think it's like, you had this traumatic event where, you witnessed a car hijack, you were part of it. But it's simple things like cyberbullying. It causes a lot of PTSD for kids, things such as, like the one of the biggest challenges now is identity struggles, kids who are LGBTIQ plus right now. And I think that it's substance abuse. There's so many different reasons for it right now. But if we had to just have an umbrella, it would be depression, anxiety disorders, because if you look at research, I mean, kids are getting diagnosed with anxiety at a very early age
mm,
and with depression. So for me, I've diagnosed 9-year-olds with depression, which I think is just crazy for me because at 9 years old, you just think to yourself, like, what is actually happening? And I think the biggest thing also is cyberbullying. I think that kids have too much access to too many platforms, and I think it just opens up a big, it allows for more bullying to happen. And I think when you look at mental health, the anxiety, depression, you also look at things like adjustment disorders, bullying, cyberbullying. There's just a long list, as well as, like I said, trauma and PTSD that is also just changed over the years. There is still a lot of things like sexual abuse, and I mean, it's peer sexual abuse now. You have young kids who are experiencing sexual abuse. It's just, if you just look at the research, it's just increased over the last, I would say, 7 years, um, for like with mental health, common mental health challenges right now.
sure, that's. I mean, I think you've tried to simplify it for us, but it still sounds like so many things a parent or an adult in a child's life should be looking out for, right? I mean, you spoke about issues around identity, creating anxiety or leading to depression, which then subsequently can evolve and develop into suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And then you spoke about bullying, which is obviously like abuse at the hands of a peer, right?
Mhm.
And then you spoke about sexual abuse, but you didn't talk about sexual abuse in this like stranger danger kind of way, but you said like young people are experiencing sexual abuse at the hands of their peers as well. And then those things also turn into anxiety, depression.
Mhm.
And then you talk about like social media and how
Mhm.
kids being on um, all the time and on so many different platforms is also exposing them to, I suppose, stimuli that can trigger that, right?
Mhm.
Talk about cyberbullying, which is a kind of common one. I think even adults experience this,
Yeah.
um, unfortunately. But I think that just that much access to the to news and information and
Mhm.
that can then trigger all like yeah, like set off anxiety
Mhm.
and depression. Okay. And then that can lead to um, could, right, not always, but could lead to then suicidal behavior, suicidal thoughts.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before we even go into um, like what to do and how to respond to this,
Mhm.
can you maybe just help us understand this the self harm, this
Mhm.
suicide ideation, this
Mhm.
suicide attempt, and then this death by suicide, right? Um,
Mhm.
or can you just help us like define those terms?
Mhm. Okay, so I'll go into more detail about it, but basically, suicidal ideation are just the thoughts about ending one's life. So it doesn't mean it directly leads to death. Suicide attempt is obviously the act of trying to commit suicide and not succeeding, and then self harm is injuring oneself just to cope with emotions or overwhelming feelings are caused by different stresses. So the thing with suicidal ideation, you get two different types of suicidal ideation. You get passive and you get active. So with passive suicidal ideation, it's you just focusing on thoughts about death, wanting to die, but not having any specific plans to commit suicide. And some of the terms or the language would be, I wish I could just disappear, you know.
Mm,
Um, what is the point of this? There's really nothing I'm interested in, so with suicidal ideation, with passive suicidal ideation, it's just this numb feeling, and it's just that whole wanting to escape, but there's no plan to escape. And then you get active suicidal ideation. It's actually taking the plans and steps to committing suicide. So you'll see kids, and we've had that experience at the place that we used to work, where kids would research how to end one's life, and I think that it's about method, it's about planning, timing, and I think like if a child, for example, that stays at a boarding school, everybody sleeps at 10, let's just say, everybody's out. So active suicidalization is planning, okay, so there won't be anybody around to disturb or disrupt my plan. So suicidal ideation is passive and it's active. That leads to then attempts, that leads to then, the worst part of suicide. So then you get suicide attempt is when you engage in behavior intended to end your life, but it doesn't end your life, right? So some of the warning signs for that I've also experienced with in my own profession is children will start giving away personal belongings, right? They don't react as they would normally to certain things that could trigger one, like bullying or experiencing something traumatic. They won't react in a way that is normal, acceptable reactions to things. And I think those are some of the warning signs that they give things away, leaving goodbye notes. There was a child that I worked with who tweeted, and the only way we found out that this child was trying to commit suicide was through another child saying, "Hey, look what this person tweeted," and that was like the new version of goodbye notes. In today when we talk about social media. And then, so that's suicide attempt. And then self harm is, we call it non suicidal self injury. So it's deliberately inflicting harm on yourself. So the most common one right now is cutting. And another one is obviously like scratching, excessive scratching, and burning between the thighs or in places where it's not very visible. And some of the warning signs are long sleeves, long pants. When it's hot outside, they wearing things that are not appropriate weather clothing. And but then again, it's about not wanting to die but wanting to cope, and they find hope through physical injury. So those are the differences between ideation, attempt, and self harm between the three.
Got it. Thank you for that. So, if my child, right, or a young person in my care had is self-harming, should I worry that that means they're suicidal and they might then um, end their life by suicide? Like, is there a direct move from self-harm to
Mm-hmm.
an attempt?
Yeah. So I think that it doesn't always indicate, attempt and then eventual suicide. I think they're both serious indicators of emotional distress, but it's about the motivation between, So we look at it doesn't always lead to it. So a lot of the kids who are self-harming, they need immediate intervention, right? But it doesn't always lead to suicide. I mean, it has happened. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they will end up wanting to take their own lives.
Okay, so my immediate reaction shouldn't be to get so worried and
Mhm.
now go on suicide watch, but instead
Mhm.
maybe I should figure out what are these difficult emotions that you're trying to deal with, that
Mhm.
you feel like a physical release, a
Mhm.
physical harming will help.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And then you spoke about active and passive suicide
Mhm.
thoughts or ideas.
Mhm.
Now, someone actually asked me this question a few weeks ago. They said, is there a cure for having suicidal thoughts and
Mhm.
having a desire to end your life by
Mhm.
suicide, right?
Mhm.
And that just made me think about the fact that there's people, and I think we've both encountered people like that who can tell you that for a long time they've had thoughts of suicide, but they haven't acted on them, but they've just had them,
Mm-hmm.
persistent,
Yeah.
consistent thoughts, right? So what
Yeah.
does that mean, right? Like if I know a young person who tells me for 2 years I've definitely thought about suicide
Mm-hmm.
more than 10 times,
Mm-hmm.
does that mean that they have these thoughts, but they just haven't gotten to the point of acting on them? Or does that mean that something else is at play or is happening?
So I think with the young people that I've worked with, it starts with intrusive thoughts, right? And intrusive thoughts come from seeing things online in movies and TV shows. I mean, it's PG-13, but there are so many things like suicidal idea. There's just so much going on in the, so it may be age appropriate, but it also creates this anxiety, this intrusive thought, and then it leads to thoughts of, what if I just jump off the balcony? It always starts with these little things and it leads up and up and up. So, like you were saying, they could have these thoughts for 2 years and not act on it, or not even, spend too much time thinking about it. But there's still necessary intervention that needs to take place. There's certain things like, which we'll talk about later on, is like cognitive behavioral therapy. It's challenging these difficult thoughts, and identifying that is it an intrusive thought? Is it just an ideation about a thought? Is it something that you eventually feel like it's going to lead over to something? But yeah, I think that immediate intervention, anything with suicide, is a flag, right? You can't sit on it for too long, because something could happen that could trigger the bigger thing that I've been thinking about it for 2 years. So I've basically researched my thoughts and things that I've watched. So now I know, if this happens, I could possibly do that. So I definitely think that it warrants immediate intervention or action.
Okay, so I shouldn't then, as an adult in a young person's life, say that, oh, this one is always talking about suicide, and
Mhm.
we
Yeah,
like we hear about this all the time. It's attention seeking. Don't worry about
yeah,
it. But what I'm
yeah.
hearing is that we hear or pick up thoughts of suicide, passive or active. We should act. We should
Mhm.
intervene in some way, right? We
Mhm.
should provide an intervention.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
So, like, for example, if I can just cut you off very quickly. So, when a child has communicated to me that they're feeling suicidal, we obviously do a risk factor, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, there's different scales these days that you use to measure, like suicidal ideation to attempt to, eventual. So, I think it's also the risk factor of it. So, it's different. Like, we've had kids that come into the office and say, I've been having suicidal thoughts. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to admit them, or we have to, have more extreme intervention. We're able to identify that this child needs immediate therapy intervention, right? There are kids that we've taken that have told us that they thinking about suicide, and we've taken them to a psychiatrist, and psychiatrists will say, well, you have an anxiety disorder. So I think we also have to look at the degree as a risk factor, and then act accordingly to that as well. But obviously, that's the thing that a parent should also do, is seek out professional help, right? Where a professional can actually do a mental health evaluation and actually see, actually, it's an anxiety disorder. And I think these are the steps that you can take to support your child. So I think there's also a degree in risk factors and that's also like what we'll probably speak about, is equipping parents to understand the risk factors as well, and to then follow, this child needs psychologist, psychiatrist, or anything along the lines in terms of intervention in that way.
got it. Okay. So I can have thoughts of suicide, but I need to, I'm on a scale. So I could be a 2 out of 10, or I could be a 9 out of 10, right? Obviously, like 10 being complete risk.
Mm-hmm.
So once we understand that, then we can figure out what is the appropriate intervention. I also want to highlight that you said parents or adults that care for children must seek professional help. They shouldn't think that they can handle it by themselves,
Yeah, yeah,
because they won't be able to, as you said,
yeah,
pick up that, no, man, this is anxiety, or
yeah.
it's an anxiety disorder that's
Mm-hmm.
creating these intrusive thoughts that are then
Mm-hmm.
recurring and being persistent, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
it's expressive mood disorder that we're seeing here, or something else. we can't pick
Mhm.
that up as parents and adults who aren't trained. So when we
Yeah.
see that and hear those things, let's get to a professional as soon as possible.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, because obviously the aim is for us to prevent anything from happening. But we don't want to now
Yeah.
respond or react once something
Mhm.
has happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we then maybe talk a little bit about the myths and the misconceptions around this, right? Because there's people who might be listening to this and who think, I'm not even going to bring this up
Yeah.
because I talk about suicide, then my child is going to
Mhm.
start thinking about suicide, and then I'm going
Yeah.
to have it on my hands, right? Is
Mhm.
that true?
Yeah.
If we educate on suicide or talk about suicide as a family discussion,
Mhm.
does that then lead to
Mhm.
does that then lead to suicidal behavior?
Mhm. I mean, it makes sense sort of to think that it could open up something for the kids. But if you look at research, it's actually equipping parents with the necessary tools to have a discussion and have the child sit, like, okay, my parents are aware of it. So, for example, a parent can ask, "Are you feeling so overwhelmed that you feel like you're at risk to hurt yourself?" And I think it's about having that platform because a lot of kids who are suicidal don't communicate or they don't feel understood or they don't feel heard by family, friends, caretakers, like you said, adults that are involved in their lives. So I think it's definitely a myth that, talking about suicide could put it in their head. I think that kids are scared to speak about things. So I think once you open it up, I think that they won't feel so isolated by these thoughts because you're actually bringing them up and saying, okay, this is normal. Like I understand why you're feeling so stressed out. But I think it's just opening up the space, and I think kids need a space to speak. And I think the best space to start with is at home. um yeah, that's just, yeah.
Any ideas just off the cuff of how,
Mhm.
if we're sitting at home and we're having dinner or we're relaxed, how can I bring this up as a parent?
Mm. Yeah, I think at the dinner table may be a little bit rough, but I think it's just being aware. And I think the biggest thing for parents is awareness. What are your children watching? What does Instagram mean? What happens on Snapchat? I think once the parents understand all of these influences, they're able to then have more informed conversations with their children. So I think that I don't think there's an appropriate time to bring it up. I think it's just time to bring it up. You know, you hear about kids' suicidal ideation attempts, etc. So there's no appropriate time to say, I'm going to sit down. It has to be at this time. It just has to be, we need to speak about this, and not try and, because kids will feel like it's an intervention. It will feel like more of an attack. But I think they need to be, parents need to be able to sit down and just have a conversation in a non-threatening way to kids, because a lot of kids will be like, oh, we want to talk about sex. Yes, we know you have to use a condom. Yes, like, so kids have that mentality as well. I don't think there's an appropriate time. I think parents need to sit down and say, what I'm watching and what I see, or what you guys are watching, or on social media platforms or different platforms. These are the things that worry me, and these are things that I feel like I need to speak to you guys about. So I think that would be one of the ways that you can bring it up with your kids at home.
I like that. Just really saying, I'm hearing this. I saw this on the
Hmm.
news. This
Yeah,
celebrity um, died in
yeah,
this. What do you guys think?
yeah, yeah,
And then take it from there. Because really,
yeah.
yeah, I don't know how you could really have the perfect time to. Not really the
Hmm.
kind of conversation you have over dinner, right?
Yeah,
But we should be having it, and we should be
yeah.
having conversations. All right. I have heard this when I was growing up, especially that talking about suicide, even attempting, is attention seeking.
Hmm.
Like in
Hmm.
the parents or the adults in that young person's life just say, like, stop with the attention. What do you
Hmm.
want? Um,
Hmm.
is it true? Like, is it a form of seeking attention when a young person
Hmm.
um, self harms or even
Hmm.
attempts suicide?
Yeah. I think attention in a, attention in a non, what is the word? Oh, I just want everybody to like be around. I think that's a little bit confusing. I think it's a tension of like, I'm actually dying inside. I actually need you to realize how bad I'm actually feeling, because there's a lot of factors like religion, culture, where you don't speak about your feelings. Like parents will put unbelievable pressure on a child academically to do well, and the child can't keep up, right? And I think the child is a not a, I'd rather say a cry for help, right? Because the parents don't believe in therapy. I mean, I've had lots of parents who will come for one session with their child and be like, I don't think the child needs it. He's fine. He's going to school. He's doing well. He's doing all of these things. But I think it's this, this trauma or emotional pain that they have nowhere to speak about, right? And I think that it's just another way of them trying to show their parents or their caretakers how serious it is. So I do think it's a cry for help. I don't think it's an attention thing. I mean, there obviously are cases where kids do certain things for certain, attention, but for the most part, hurting yourself, I don't think I think that's a cry for help. And there's a lot of factors that go into that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing it's a cry for help. And if someone was crying in front of us, right, we would pay attention to them.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it is an ask for help, right? It is,
Yeah.
but maybe they're
Mhm.
just starting to express themselves. They're starting
Yeah.
to say what's wrong, right? And I think that's where
Mhm.
you mentioned that then a psychiatrist or a psychologist
Mhm.
would be able to then unpack that with them and really get to the root of it, right? Is there trauma? Is
Yeah.
there PTSD? Is there
Mhm.
anxiety, the
Yeah.
depression
That's good. Yeah.
manifesting in this way?
Yeah. That's good. That's worded well. Yeah.
Yeah. No. All right. So if you could have a parent or an adult that was listening to this episode take away one thing about suicide and attempting,
Mhm.
and what what would it be?
Educating themselves about it, you know, which leads to other things like open communication, being attentive, encouraging help seeking, like promoting healthy coping skills, and all of those things only come from educating yourself. So I think the more parents take an invested interest in this thing, a lot of positives can happen. And I've had parents who collaborate really well with their kids as soon as they hear, my child is okay, what do I need to do? Like, and they're the ones who are attending seminars and, all of these things that are helping. And those are the kids that have a higher chance of um, coping and dealing with things, because I don't think it ever goes away. I don't think that mental health things, the minute you take an antidepressant, like your life is fine. I don't think it happens that way, but it's an ongoing process of treating intervention. So I think for a parent is they need to educate themselves. We have access to so much constantly with information overflow. So definitely, parents need to educate themselves on these topics. Yeah.
All right. Educate, educate,
Mhm.
educate. And there's so many
Mhm.
places that we can go for education, right?
Yeah.
Reach out to us as Safeguarding Africa, but they can also reach out directly to
Mhm.
someone like yourself, right? And
Yeah.
request a session and just say, can we please talk? I need to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
My kid's going through this.
Mhm.
Help me out, right? Those services
Yeah.
are available. Right. Stacey, there's something also that's called risk factors that can
Mhm.
set off suicide, right?
Mhm.
One that I know of is like grief, right? I know that
Mhm.
somebody we love, we can feel like, and I think this even for adults, right? You might just feel like, I don't want to live without this person.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some other risk factors that parents or
Mhm.
adults that
Mhm.
care for people should look out for, right? When what has happened,
Mhm.
could we then see an increase in this person's um, ideation on suicide or even
Mhm.
attempting?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I look at as a professional, what are the mental health issues that the child is having, right? So things, I mean, like anxiety disorders is a big thing, right? There's a mental health issue that's causing this. So I think like that's why I said earlier on, parents need to seek professional help for them to be for children to be evaluated to see, okay, it's a mental health challenge, like anxiety disorder. But a lot of the other things are academic pressure. I think everybody's so competitive right now that if your child as a parent isn't doing as well as your neighbor or your friend, you maybe intentionally or unintentionally put pressure on your child. So there's, academic pressure, social isolation as well. If you don't have Instagram, you like, okay, but like kids relate more on things that they have in common. So I think like social media, you don't have it, okay, we can't connect. Obviously bullying in person and online, like you said, even adults go through it right now. Family issues, conflict, which is a big thing. Conflict in families. I mean, there's such an influx of divorce right now with families, and parents just, not, they, the interest is not on the kids, it's themselves. So that puts a lot of pressure on the children. Like we said about social media influence, and then obviously traumatic events, sexual abuse, anything, that you would I don't limit trauma to, like what I think trauma is. So I think traumatic events on any scale. So I think those are some of the risk factors for kids that I've worked with, and, like what some research
Mm,
says right now. Yeah.
yeah, okay. So if I am married and I'm going through a divorce and I
Mm-hmm.
have children,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that this extremely difficult and painful situation that I'm going through, one of the things that I need to be also
Mm-hmm.
zooming into is how my kids
Mm-hmm.
feel, because this
Mm-hmm.
actually setting off anxiety,
Yeah.
depression, them that could then lead to that, right?
Yeah.
And then you spoke about also existing mental health issues. That something is,
Yeah.
if there is a mental health issue, there's a likelihood that it then we will find, or it
Yeah.
will heighten the risk of suicidal thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bullying, uh,
Mm-hmm.
in person and online, as you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, and then also you spoke about social isolation, right? The young person is feeling disconnected
Mm-hmm.
from community, right? For whatever reason,
Yeah.
right? But feeling that way,
Mm-hmm.
um, that might also lead to, well, maybe the world is a better place without me, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
create that. Whew. All right. So there's kind of a few things that parents need to be, or adults need to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Person is existing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and presenting. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe let's switch to that now and just talk about what's the role of the adult in prevention, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've
Yeah.
spoken about the parent, you've spoken about psychologists, psychiatrists, and I think parents
Mm-hmm.
sometimes can feel like the pressure is all on them, and they also are
Mm-hmm.
human, they too have their own challenges, so like they can't
Yeah.
be able to do everything all the time and be,
Mm-hmm.
but also
Yeah.
I feel like these resources, like the psychologists, the psychiatrists, they're
Mm-hmm.
expensive, already I'm
Definitely.
going through a divorce and my funds are
Mm-hmm.
tight, I really can't afford to now pay 800 rand per session
Yeah.
for well to be seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we build, suppose I'm asking, how do we build a village around the child, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we then engage the teachers,
Yeah.
so what would a teacher look for and see in their context,
Mm-hmm.
right? What would a
Mm-hmm.
neighbor look for and see in their perspective, from
Mm-hmm.
their perspective, for this
Yeah.
same child, you know
Mm-hmm. So I think there should be social emotional learning programs of some sort, and I think some schools get it right. They have peer counselors, and I think a lot of kids will go to their peers before adults, obviously. And I think that is an important thing for schools. I think I mean, we train teachers to better manage their class, but we don't train teachers to deal with certain mental health challenges in their classes. So again, that's social emotional learning. And I think the other part of parents educating themselves is research, right? So like you said, it's not affordable for everybody to have their child come for an 800 session every week, right? It's unaffordable. But there are programs that are free that are set up, and I think, Mandisa, I can share those with you, and you can post it. Where they are family intervention groups. They're very small groups, but it's starting to grow, and I think it's about building that network, like you said, a community. And I think it doesn't just mean that parents should go for social emotional learning for their kids. It's the grandparents, because kids will spend time with the grandparents, aunts, uncles, whoever they can get involved, because that is then building the community. So I think the schools do need to step it up a bit, because the risk of suicide and suicide attempts at school is becoming more common. So I think teachers need to be equipped, parents need to be equipped, aunts, uncles, like you said, whichever adults are in their lives, need to have some social emotional. And I think that's the new thing that's happening internationally, is a social emotional learning program that everybody's setting up. So I think we have very limited resources in South Africa. And I think mental health is still a bit of a taboo thing, just culturally, religiously. So I think just trying to develop, these social emotional learning groups at school, at home, outside. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
It does,
Mm-hmm.
because I think what you're saying is that actually this social emotional learning that we often create for students at school, whether it's a life
Mm-hmm.
skills class or life orientation,
Yes.
you're saying blow it up. Everyone should be
Mm-hmm.
getting social emotional learning, basically. Everyone should
Yeah.
be doing that, because then you understand these things much better,
Yeah.
and then we're all better at responding. Then this child is
Mm-hmm.
a village of educated, or
Exactly.
yeah, educated people who
Yeah.
understand what's going
Mm-hmm.
on with them, and then can better support them.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really good suggestion, actually. And I think, yeah, there are organizations who are trying to do that. So maybe if we can also just
Mm-hmm.
spotlight them and say this is what they do,
Yeah.
and you can go as an uncle or as an aunt, just to understand
Exactly.
the world from a young person's perspective, so that you can be better
Yeah.
able to and support them when they're struggling
Yeah.
to, right?
Yeah.
So like what you spoke about with schools, you said schools should have things like training your teachers on how to
Mm-hmm.
observe and identify and recognize these behaviors, and then refer or ask for help. But
Yeah.
also, young people are very likely, are more likely to go to a peer and say, I'm not okay,
Mm-hmm.
or another peer
Yeah.
will likely to pick up if their friend is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So peer counselor
Yeah.
programs, at
Mm-hmm.
school, but even in community spaces, right? Like at a church or something like that, have
Oh, yes.
that kind of set up, so that young people are, have different avenues where they can go, and then
Yeah.
those peer counselors know that they can then go
Mm-hmm.
to an adult and report that
Yeah.
I've heard this, the person is struggling,
Mm-hmm.
and then they can get the help they need. Right.
Yeah.
Structures, structures, structures.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay. Just to wrap up,
Mm-hmm.
I want us to talk a little bit about a difficult part of all of this, right? Um, when your child or a young person has attempted suicide,
Mm-hmm.
what is the aftercare, right, for that
Mm-hmm.
young person, um, and for the adults who are providing the support,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very difficult one, and it's a sad one. I think we've worked with parents of children who are suicidal, or we haven't really had attempts. I don't remember really any attempts. I think there was self harm, but I don't remember having any attempts. I think the first thing you do is ensure that child's safety, right, at home. What could be some of the triggers at home? Like kids who self harm with sharp objects, remove them, especially in that vulnerable time soon after it's happened. I think removing things that could trigger that event, I think, is important. So I think ensuring safety at home. And I mean, even things such as taking the keys out of doors, it's simple things like that, locking up medication, or so I think the first thing is creating a safe environment for the child to come back into. I think from providing emotional support. So, getting that network of community, because it's a lot on the parent. It weighs very heavily on the parent, and the parent feels completely and total totally responsible for it. Especially, I've had parents who have had kids who have attempted, like in terms of my private practice, where it's just the mother that comes in, the fathers that it's a lot of it's a lot harder on the parents, or
Mm.
actually, like you said, the adults that are acting as parents. I think the other thing is avoiding blame. I don't think we should place blame on parents, or I think that's also the thing that makes it very hard for parents as well. And encouraging professional help. I think we have trained trauma counselors that do online calls for free. Like, I'll share some of the resources that I've recently come into contact with. Professional help, like even said, like a churches have counseling, pastoral care. They have counselors, that you can get involved in. Involving family, like I said, involving family. There's a lot of group therapy that you can do with families as well. um, and then continuing to monitor for warning signs. Like, I had a parent who was child was cyber bullied, and as soon as a child, this is private practice I'm talking about, um, they were bullied on their phone, and that's what led to the attempt.
Mm.
And the parent gave the phone right back. It's like, you've got to, those are that's not a great way to monitor warning signs, because you're giving the trigger back to the child. I think the biggest thing is creating a safety plan. This child was triggered because they failed a subject. What do I do immediately? I need to have a safety plan put in place for that. And then obviously following up, following up with where the kid is, um, and I think just connecting with all the people that are supporting, like um, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, pastors, whatever your support is. So I definitely think it's ensuring safety first and foremost, providing emotional support, encouraging professional help, involving family systems. I think those are the main things that research has shown to work best for these kinds of situations.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. And I really do feel for the families, the adults as well in that situation, because
Mm-hmm.
you can feel, a bit of blame, even from
Yeah.
yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you don't want this to happen again, so you can feel the pressure of wanting to prevent
Mm-hmm.
it from happening.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what you outlined for us is some really practical things, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
uh, remove the triggers, and
Mm-hmm.
don't give them back or put them back in place
Mm-hmm.
too soon, right?
Yeah.
I also like the idea of having a safety plan, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
saying together with the young person, these thoughts um, come to you again, or something triggers them, so you fail an exam or you see that person, whatever it is. What the immediate thing to do, um,
Mm-hmm.
to ensure your safety,
Yeah.
I think that proactive planning will also help
Mm-hmm.
not find themselves having attempted and now recovering
Yeah.
again, because that's
Mm.
quite dramatic, and then it's like this. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I really like that. I wrote another one down, and then I think, just as you're saying, like creating that safe environment for the young
Mm-hmm.
person, and making sure that all the different stakeholders, the different people in this child's life can also,
Mm-hmm.
like they too have the care, they too have a place
Yeah.
to go, right? And I think, I mean, if you can go for counseling as a parent of a child who's attempting,
Absolutely.
please do that for yourself, so
Yeah.
that you are
Yeah.
strong enough to then support them.
And I think, like, with supporting the parents, so I've counseled parents afterwards, and I help them develop their own coping skills,
Mm,
that can eventually, spill over to helping their own child cope. Because I will do grounding and breathing with parents, because you can't tell the child, well, Ceci said you must do your breathing. Do it with your child,
mm,
Um, and let's find coping skills that work for you, but that I can do with you. Because I think we don't want to go back to isolating the child where you're feeling anxious, sit on the bed, right? You know what I mean? Parents have to get more involved. And like, it helps the parents understand where the child is. It makes them more empathetic. It makes they're more understanding to what this is. So I definitely think, like, having the parents develop their own coping skills that can help their child with their coping skills is another important factor, I think, for that.
All right. So a parent with healthy coping skills is going to be able to
Mm-hmm.
help their child develop
Yeah,
and get on the road on having their own healthy coping skills.
yeah, yeah.
Excellent. Stacey, I don't want to keep going because I know this is kind of triggering conversation. So I want listeners to not feel like we went on for too long
Mm-hmm.
about this
Yeah, yeah.
topic. But I think what you've done is really give us some tangible and practical ways to support a young person. And I just want to say that like a key takeaway is adults have to educate themselves,
Mm-hmm.
look for educational programs, seek help, understand the same way
Yeah.
if we had somebody in our family who had a
Mm-hmm.
cancer of sorts, we want to understand how does this work,
Mm-hmm.
what do they need, how to support them. Let's do that for our young people who
Yeah,
are dealing with self-harm or suicidal
yeah.
ideation. Let's understand what's happening, and then only can we be in a better position to then prevent
Mm-hmm.
um, anything tragic from results.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you so
Definitely.
much. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for having me.
How does the parent of a child that's 10 and under reach you?
Mhm. So I can give you my information by email or on WhatsApp. Parents can contact me that way.
Okay, so
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
put your contact details when we post the episode, and then
Okay.
parents can reach you there. 'Cause I think what you're doing is amazing. Um, and yeah, as many people should be able to access it, and I hope they can. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much
Cool.
for being
Thank you.
part of
Thank
our
you.
community. And
Thanks for having me.
we apologize if this session triggered you, but we more than anything hope that it gave you something to take away that you can
Mhm.
use for yourself or for a young person in your
Mhm.
life. Remember why we're doing this so that we can be who we needed. So
Mhm.
keep well and take care.
Safeguarding Africa.